Good news for all the fans of Anno. Anno 117 finally has a release window, and that is winter 2025. What's more, me and my colleagues actually got to play the game, and we can share our impressions with you. So let's not waste any time and just dive into the world of ancient Rome. I'll say this up front, Anno 117 might be one of the most important city builders of the coming years. Hell, maybe even the most important one. And while in this game you'll spend a lot of time in Latium, modeled after the Roman heartland, there's also a second area of Albion, a Celtic-inspired land. Unfortunately, we couldn't try this part of the game yet, but we know where it fits in the grand scheme of things. Latium is all about the Mediterranean beaches and evergreen meadows. While looking at the game from a distance, you might not feel like a lot has changed since Anno 1800. But if you look up close, there's countless details that weren't there before. Sure, if you look really closely, Matterlords probably still looks better, but it's a huge step up for the Anno series anyway. Also, there's a working day-night cycle, although it's a purely cosmetic feature. It doesn't influence the output of your workplaces. You can either choose to play at a specific hour of day and keep it there to set the mood you like, or you can have the game just move through the day-night cycles on its own. It's actually pretty cool. When it comes to the campaign in the game, there's a few interesting things about it. The hero of the story, previously introduced as Marcus, is only one of two potential playable characters. Marcus has a sister called Marcia, and in the beginning you have to choose one of them. Apparently this has more consequences than just changing the character's portrait, but we'll have to see about that. While Marcus, as a new governor, must prove himself and repeatedly finds that the pursuit of glory often clashes with personal ideas, Marcia faces different challenges. As a woman, it's not a given that she would receive such an important position at all in those times. Moreover, she is supposed to be forced into marriage at the beginning of the story. So we have two quite different starting situations that should do justice to historical reality, even though Anno still remains a fictional version of true history, and we don't really expect to be fact-checking Ubisoft here. The decisions supposedly don't end there. According to the developers, decisions made during the game will determine who rules the Empire, but this is something to be truly seen when the game launches. Anno 117 doesn't want to completely tear down the series' foundation, even though Anno pros will notice the first difference between this and the previous game right away. Yes, you still start typically with a trading post on the coast, but the second building is already something special. In the game, as a Roman governor, the first thing you place directly on the new land is a villa. The basic function is more or less of that of a palace in Anno 1800, but without its complex political decrees. In Anno 117, this is the central point of the player's power, even if in the very beginning it's there just for show. Only in time will you be able to expand on the villa with additional modules that can house a specialist, and these are individuals that can give you advantages like smaller workforce needed in buildings. There's obviously a lot of variety in these perks, but we only got to see a few of them in action. Overall, the villa feels a bit simplified when compared to the palace in the previous game, but that in turn was added only as a completely separate DLC in Anno 1800. Though if you're afraid that this is a sign of dumbing down the game, you can actually rest easy. Anno 117 is packed to the brim with things to do and interconnected systems, even though the first impression is that the game is a bit more approachable. Even the first population tier can now benefit from 4 supply chains, while the previous game only needed 3 at this stage. This comes as a result of a decision made by the devs that this time around you no longer need to fulfill all the available needs before advancing to the next population tier. Instead, you have the mandatory and optional needs. To make sure that it doesn't feel like a completely random thing to do, each option has its own benefits. When you look at the Libertai, oatmeal porridge increases the population in the building by 2 more residents, while sardines do it only by 1, but at the same time they also increase income per building by 1. So the more houses are supplied with various goods, the more advantages for the city come as a result, although the bare minimum you have to do is a bit less than previously. This might sound a bit complicated, but while you actually play the game, this feels very natural, and this means that every island you have under your command can be of different focus to you. Do you need more workforce or more money? In the end, it's all up to the player to decide. It gets interesting with the third tier of your citizens, because if you want to bring cheese and wine for your equites, you need to expand to Albion and make a large effort to ship these luxury goods to Latium. But unfortunately, this is the only sign of Albion we had in the game at this point, and we couldn't actually play it. According to Ubisoft, the optional resource system is primarily intended to make it easier for the newcomers to get started in the Anno world. After all, in the best case scenario, they only have to manage half as many supply chains as before to reach the final population tier. If you ask me, this plan doesn't quite work as intended. I can imagine that new players might be even more intimidated by the sheer mass of options. After all, it's easy to get the feeling that you can do something wrong. Although, once you get the hang of it, it's a nicely thought out system. A side effect of the optional resources is that I can build up a really large settlement noticeably faster in 1.1.7. After all, only one of two resources is sufficient for basic supply, but if I have both, the city can quickly become twice as large without me running out of supplies. That's why 1.1.7 plays noticeably faster, but that's not necessarily bad as long as the challenge doesn't completely dry up in the long run. But we'll know that only when we can play the full game and not the short hands-on session. You also have to remember that your island might not provide you all the resources that you might need for a supply chain. Certain crops might not grow there, or you won't have a specific type of fish at the shore. That's when you might want to start another settlement on a different island with different properties, or maybe you'll just trade the resources needed for the supply chain with other factions on the map. It's all up to you. A big game changer for some is that Anno 1.1.7 now supports diagonal roads. These kinds of roads are primarily a visual treat, making the settlement look a good deal more organic despite the grid. However, those who want to play completely efficiently should stick to the classic blocks, as diagonal roads often create empty spaces if you're not careful. It's all up to you, but if you want, you can actually turn off diagonal roads. Now, there's one more detail you have to consider when planning your resource chain, and that's building effects. Many buildings have an influence radius, which grants special effects to structures within this circle. This is recognizable by the arrows above the buildings. Green arrows represent a positive effect, while red arrows have a negative effect. Some buildings can also have advantages and disadvantages. For example, the bakery that I have here increases income but reduces fire safety. This gives this building puzzle in Anno a whole new dimension. The bakery is a good example. Previously, I would have placed the building near the production facilities that supply it, in this case near the mill and a charcoal burner. The mill in turn would be near a wheat field so that the goods don't have to take a detour via the warehouse. But now the mill absolutely has to occupy a building site by the river, and the charcoal burner should be in the forest. I can still manage that well. I can also build the wheat field by the river. But where to put the bakery now? If I place it near the mill, it's far from the city center, and its building buff just gets lost. But if I place it in the city, it makes the path that the intermediate products have to travel longer. And on top of that, the fire hazard increases. You just have to remember that putting negative effects on your neighborhood might be in the end beneficial when you weigh in the positive aspect that comes with it. You just need to balance it out with other safety measures to make sure there's no accidental fire. And that's what exactly it's all about in strategy games. To make these decisions a little easier, Anno 1.1.7 relies on very specific numerical values. While Anno veterans are used to values for population, workforce, and of course money, numbers for fire safety, health, prestige, happiness, faith, and knowledge are now also here. Fires, plagues, or uprisings could always occur in the past, but now none of that happens out of the blue. In the attribute bar, everything has a numerical value, and if fire safety is at 200, for example, I can definitely afford a bakery in the city center without the risk of going down in history as an arsonist like Emperor Nero. The same applies to health and happiness. If one of the values slips into the negative, I have to prepare for a potential disaster. It is precisely these numerical values that are usually influenced by building effects, but also by goods you have. As already mentioned, sardines increase income and population, but more exquisite luxury goods like wine also buff happiness and faith, while the knowledge value drops. So yes, wine makes your residents happy, but a bit more dim-witted. To increase fire safety, happiness, and health, you can also build a classic fire station, a guard post, or a doctor's house, but those who really want to show off their romanity, well, just build an entire aqueduct which lets water flow from the mountains into a cistern, massively increasing the island's fire safety and health. And it just looks magnificent too. Thanks to these numerical values, Anno 1.1.7 remains comprehensible at all times, but the world also becomes a bit trivialized as a result. It's difficult to say whether this is good or bad in the long run. For me, this system works. Such a transparent solution is probably better, as disasters don't feel arbitrary. Moreover, Anno 1.1.7 needs all this so that the optional resources remain motivating. So it kind of makes sense. As a result of these numerical values everywhere, diplomacy with AI factions is now also completely understandable. If I pay a neighbor a visit, it's broken down in detail why they want to enter into an alliance or trade agreement with me or not. Negative points might include too small an army, too few ships, or because I worship the wrong gods. Also, AI factions will have contracts for you to do, and these are quite a nice way of increasing your income, especially in the early stages when your supply chains are still being built and you need a bit of extra cash. Also, through contracts, you can actually acquire specialists, and as I already mentioned, housing them in a villa provides benefits for the whole island. Okay, so all the attributes that I previously mentioned, stuff like fire safety, happiness, and so on, have been known for a while, but there's also faith and knowledge. Anno 1800 already had a school, but only because the workers absolutely wanted one. They didn't really get any smarter from it. In Anno 117, they actually do. The Grammaticus generates knowledge. The more buildings the Grammaticus covers, the more knowledge points are continuously generated. Knowledge contributes to the first classic research tree ever in an Anno game. And sure, there was a technology nexus from Anno 2205, but firstly, it was only part of the DLC, and secondly, it was primarily a pure efficiency tool with increased percentage buffs for various production chains. The tech tree in Anno 117 also occasionally just tweaks a few sliders, but beyond that, it also unlocks genuinely new buildings, ship types, or entire production chains. Many advances that were previously completely dependent on population density can now come into play through technology. This network of research nodes is divided into economic, civic, and military. While economy, for example, unlocks new loading ramps and carts for warehouses, in the civic branch I can get a well that increases fire safety. Or in the military branch, there's a new supply chain for armor. Lots of cool stuff. To advance into the deeper regions of the research tree, you need sufficient knowledge, but you also have to achieve certain goals. That can be a new city status or establishing a first trade route. Whether this promotes long-term motivation or not remains unpredictable. At least it wasn't disruptive while playing, and on the contrary, it's rather fun when you get to unlock something new again. 117 is also the first Anno ever to get a comprehensive religious system in which, as in so many areas of this massive city builder, I have a choice. Which god or goddess should hold their protective hand over my island? It's a choice you face as soon as you erect the first sanctuary. As you can see, it looks pretty cool, but it actually also does something. If I dedicate it to one of the 6 available deities, every building in the vicinity continuously generates faith in that god. I initially had the choice between Ceres, goddess of agriculture, Neptune, god of the sea, and Mars, god of chocolate bars. Or was it war? I can never remember. Anyway, we'll get to war later. Once chosen, each of these deities grants different advantages. In my game, I first chose Ceres, and that helped with my agriculture. Oats, wheat, bread, and porridge get a boost. How massive that boost is depends on how much faith my sanctuary has already generated in Ceres' name. Eventually, with enough faith, I can even get more special advantages. As a Ceres worshipper, I can, for example, create larger fields with correspondingly higher yields. Neptune can speed up ships. Mars unlocks a new land unit. Those are cool bonuses. I can even have shrines as a new building type, which then have a different building effect on the surroundings depending on the deity. Overall, while it's again heavily number driven, it's still quite a useful faith system with a lot of potential in the later stages of the game. We'll have to see about that. But now back to chocolate bars. War. Land battles are indeed back in Anno 117. How could they not be when the Romans were particularly famous for their legions? Keep in mind with the following scenes that war was not really the focus in this playable version, and all this rarely comes into play in the first few hours of the game. Anyone who goes to war in Anno 117 needs a small army for it. You can train units for this either in the villa or in the barracks, and the unit selection is larger in the latter. Unlike in Anno 1404, for example, a battle with land units doesn't run automatically. You can directly control any type of unit you might have, so it definitely works like in a real-time strategy game, though you shouldn't expect the depth of Age of Empires, for example. To get the soldiers to the enemy island, you're going to need a fleet. The men go on board and disembark on the enemy island. To conquer that island, you have to capture both the villa and the trading post. Once that's done, you can either take over the island with everything on it, make it your vassal, or rebuild it completely. It all seems quite simple at first, but it's still more complex than what we're used to from Anno. When it comes to naval battles, however, it all plays out quite familiarly, though without crashing broadsides like in Anno 1800. You can equip ships with watchtowers, catapults, or oars if you sacrifice cargo space for it. A really cool system to perfectly adapt a fleet to the player's needs. Nevertheless, war remains a choice, but as you can see, war actually changes, contrary to what Fallout keeps telling us. Okay, to sum things up. you surely notice what characterizes Anno 117 at its core. It's your decisions. Almost everything in the game is an option in some form. Who you want to play as, where you want to play, whether with or without waging war, with all resources or just a few. After playing Anno 117, I can be optimistic for the upcoming winter release. The game gives me many options, yes, but none of them feel superficial at the moment. Also, while most veterans will immediately make the most out of what Anno 117 offers, more amateur players, like me, will also be able to get a grasp of everything that's happening here. The game makes it pretty clear of what you can do, so the only thing you have to do is pay attention and then think. Of course, 3 hours of playtime isn't much, and whether Anno 117 will meet the high expectations of the community remains to be seen. But at the moment, it seems that Ubisoft is on a good roll with the series. The game is enormously fun and truly feels like a real Anno, not a bland mass-market product without any identity. One last skepticism remains whether all the optional content doesn't rob the game of substance in some way, especially since it's quite clear that the modular system is also intended to facilitate DLCs later on, so it's not all purely for gameplay reasons. Let me know what you think of Anno 117, if the game is interesting to you, and whether the changes that Ubisoft is introducing are a good or bad direction from your perspective. Thank you for watching. Take care.